The late afternoon sun was a pale, watery disk behind a slate-grey Chicago sky, its light doing little to warm the frigid air. Rain, sharp as needles, lashed against the windows of the Sterling Tower, a 75-story skyscraper that was the latest crown jewel in a real estate empire. Inside, on the 15th floor, a very different kind of storm was brewing. The air was thick with the scent of wet concrete and desperation. Olivia stood near a partially erected wall, her gloved hands gripping a piece of rebar. At 30, she was a study in quiet determination. Her face, smudged with dust and framed by a messy ponytail, was lined with the constant worry of a single mother. Every day she came to this site, she carried the weight of her responsibilities like a second tool belt. Her son, Liam, was a bright, curious 10-year-old, and every paycheck was a tiny victory against the odds stacked against them. This job wasn't her dream, but it was her reality, a brutal, honest trade that put a roof over their heads and food on their table. The silence on the floor was broken by the rhythmic clang of construction and the distant roar of a crane. Then, a sound that cut through everything, a deep metallic groan that felt less like a noise and more like a vibration in her very bones. Olivia's head snapped up. She saw it immediately, a massive concrete slab, a behemoth of steel and aggregate, hanging suspended from the crane. It was twisting, its tether straining against an unseen force. A shout of warning went up from a foreman, but it was too late. The bolts holding the slab in place sheared with a terrifying shriek. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing. The slab didn't fall so much as it plunged, a multi-ton fist aimed squarely at the building's heart. A chorus of terrified screams erupted. Workers dove for cover, their hard hats clattering against the concrete floor. The slab struck a support beam with a catastrophic crack, and a shockwave of sound and debris filled the air. A fine, white dust exploded outward, choking the very light from the room. When the dust began to settle, a new sound emerged. It was a cry, high-pitched and raw with terror. It wasn't the shout of a worker, but the piercing shriek of a young woman. Olivia, huddled behind a stack of sheetrock, felt her heart lurch. She peeked out and saw her. A young woman lay on the ground, half buried under a jagged piece of the fallen concrete. Her designer coat, a stark pale blue, was now stained with blood and grime. Her face was a mask of pain and shock, her eyes wide and staring. Olivia recognized the face from a recent Society page article. Sarah Sterling, daughter of Mark Sterling, the CEO whose name was emblazoned on the building's blueprint. The golden S pendant on her necklace, a symbol of her family's wealth, glinted faintly in the gloom. An icy dread gripped Olivia. This wasn't just an accident, this was a disaster. The building's emergency alarms began their piercing, insistent wail. She could hear the shouts of men, the urgent cries of "Get out!" and the scramble of feet heading for the stairwell. Her survival instinct screamed at her to join them. She saw a clear path to the stairs, a chance to escape the crumbling chaos. But the sound of Sarah's whimpering, now growing weaker, held her in place. The whimpering was not a sound of privilege, but of pure human suffering. It was the sound of a person who was about to be abandoned. Olivia thought of Liam, of his bright smile, of the promises she'd made to him. She knew that running would keep her safe, but it would also leave her with a guilt that would be as heavy as the slab that had just fallen. In that moment, a choice was made, not with logic, but with the quiet, powerful conviction of a mother who couldn't turn away from someone in pain. She pushed herself to her feet and began to walk toward the wreckage, her own fear a tight knot in her stomach. The building's alarms continued their relentless shriek, a desperate soundtrack to the unfolding tragedy. The smell of dust and broken metal was overwhelming, a choking, visceral reminder of the danger. The stairwell was now a distant, inaccessible roar of descending feet. Olivia was alone with Sarah. "Help me," Sarah whimpered, her voice a reedy whisper. The look in her eyes was one of pure terror, a primal fear that had nothing to do with her family's wealth or status. Olivia knelt beside her, her voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of chaos. "I'm here. Don't try to move. Just stay with me." She spoke with an authority she didn't know she possessed. The instincts of a rescuer kicking in. She saw the problem clearly. A massive, jagged piece of concrete was pinning Sarah's legs, its weight slowly, methodically crushing her. She tried to budge it with her hands, but it was like trying to move a mountain. It wouldn't even tremble. The sight of Sarah's face, pale and slick with sweat, filled Olivia with a cold dread. "My legs. I can't feel them," Sarah cried, her voice breaking. Olivia's mind raced, cataloguing the tools of her trade that lay scattered in the wreckage. A thick steel pipe, a hydraulic jack, some splintered wooden planks. She knew the pipe could be a lever, but she needed a fulcrum, and a sturdy one. She found a block of solid concrete, a piece that hadn't shattered, and wedged the pipe under the edge of the slab. She heaved, pushing down with every ounce of strength she possessed. Her muscles strained, her back screaming in protest, but the slab only shifted a fraction of an inch. It was a futile effort. "I don't think—" Sarah began, her voice trailing off into a defeated sob. "Don't you dare give up," Olivia snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "We're not done yet." The rebuke was harsh, but it had the desired effect. Sarah's eyes, wide with fear, focused on Olivia's face. Olivia's gaze fell on the hydraulic jack, partially buried under a pile of rubble. She knew this was their only chance. A hydraulic jack could lift immense weight with minimal effort, but it had to be placed correctly. She began to dig, her hands, protected by thick work gloves, still getting scraped and bruised by the sharp edges of the debris. She worked with a frenzied intensity, the ticking clock in her head, a louder, more terrifying sound than the alarms. As she worked, Sarah spoke again, her voice weak but lucid. "Why are you doing this? You don't have to be here. Everyone else left." The question hung in the air, a raw, honest plea for understanding. Olivia paused for a moment, her breath ragged. She looked at Sarah, at the gold pendant, the pale blue coat, and then back into her frightened eyes. "I'm a mom," she said simply, her voice quiet but firm. "My son is waiting for me to come home. If something happened to me, I'd want someone to help me. I'd want them to help my boy." It was the most honest explanation she could give. It transcended the divide of their different lives, of wealth and poverty, of privilege and labor. It was a commonality that was more powerful than any disaster. With renewed purpose, Olivia finally pulled the jack free. It was heavy, its metal body cold and greasy. She carefully positioned it under the slab near Sarah's legs. "Okay, Sarah, I'm going to start lifting. I need you to stay as still as you can. And you need to keep talking to me. What's the last thing you remember before this?" Sarah's face, still pale, seemed to gain a faint flicker of color. I was talking to a reporter. She was asking about the building. My dad. He was so proud of it." The words were an effort, but they were a lifeline, a connection to a life that was still waiting for her. Olivia began to pump the jack. The metal groaned, and with a slow, agonizing creak, the slab began to rise. Inch by inch, the pressure on Sarah's legs began to ease. Olivia's focus was absolute, her every move deliberate. The bond between the two women was now forged not in shared experience, but in shared struggle. The daughter of a billionaire and a working-class mother, united by a moment of catastrophic fear and quiet, heroic determination. The hydraulic jack's steady hiss was the only sound on the 15th floor now, a slow and rhythmic metronome to Olivia's immense effort. With each pump, the pressure on Sarah's legs lessened, and a faint sigh of relief escaped the young woman's lips. The slab was finally high enough. "Okay, Sarah," Olivia said, her voice strained. I need you to try and move. Just a little. Can you pull yourself free? Sarah, her face a pale mask of exhaustion, nodded weakly. With a trembling effort, she began to inch her body forward, her arms dragging her from under the slab's crushing weight. Olivia, her body aching, carefully guided her, making sure she didn't bump against the jagged edges. The last of Sarah's legs slid free, and she collapsed in a heap, her breathing shallow and ragged. Olivia immediately wrapped her own jacket around the girl, shielding her from the cold air seeping through the broken walls. Just then, the sound of boots on concrete and urgent shouts filled the air. "Fire department! Anyone here?" A voice boomed. The first wave of firefighters, their faces grim and determined beneath their helmets, burst onto the scene. They found Olivia, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, kneeling beside Sarah, her hand a reassuring presence on the young woman's shoulder. The moment was captured by the frantic lens of a media crew that had managed to follow the first responders. The image of the two women, one privileged and one working class, united in a moment of pure, raw survival, would soon be seen by millions. The next few hours were a blur. Paramedics stabilized Sarah and whisked her away. Olivia, after a quick medical checkup, was interviewed by the police and then by a swarm of reporters, their microphones thrust into her face like a pack of hungry wolves. She spoke simply, honestly, and without fanfare. "I just did what anyone would do," she said, her voice hoarse. "I saw someone who needed help." Her words, so humble and genuine, stood in stark contrast to the dramatic headlines that were already being written. "Humble hero saves CEO's daughter. Working mum's courage in chaos." The story and Olivia's face were everywhere. The working mother from the south side of Chicago became an overnight sensation, a symbol of quiet heroism in a city that often celebrated the loud and the powerful. Mark Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Industries, held a press conference the next day. His face was a mixture of gratitude, shock, and a deep, personal humility. "My daughter is alive because of the courage of a woman named Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She didn't run. She didn't hesitate. She risked everything for a stranger." The gratitude of the Sterling family was more than just words. They set up a fund for Olivia's son, ensuring his education was secure. They offered her a significant reward, a life-changing amount of money that Olivia, for the first time in her life, didn't have to worry about where the next meal would come from. She used the money wisely, paying off all her debts and, with Mark Sterling's personal endorsement, starting her own small but promising construction and contracting business. The experience had been a crucible, forging her from a quiet grunt into a confident leader. Months later, the Sterling Tower was completed. The grand opening was a lavish affair, a celebration of resilience and new beginnings. Olivia, dressed in a simple but elegant dress, stood on the same 15th floor, now a gleaming, pristine space of polished marble and floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of the city was breathtaking, a testament to the power of human creation. She saw Sarah Sterling walk toward her, fully recovered, the scar on her leg a faint line under her dress. "Olivia," Sarah said, her voice soft, "it's good to see you." She no longer wore the expensive coat or the look of an untouchable heiress. The experience had changed her too. "I wanted to thank you again, in person. You know, when I was lying there, I thought it was over. But you showed me that there's always a chance. You showed me what true courage is." Olivia simply smiled. The old fears and anxieties were still there, but they were now smaller, quieter. She had faced down a collapsing building, and in doing so, had found a new strength within herself. "You're welcome, Sarah," she said. "Now let's go enjoy this view." They stood together by the window, two women from different worlds, their lives forever intertwined by a single, unforgettable moment. They looked out at the city, a sprawling canvas of steel and glass, a place where disasters could happen, but also a place where a quiet act of heroism could change everything.